It's Orange and Blue today. We're presented by Champ Honda. It's our What If series that continues. And Mace, we got a scorcher today because what if Mr. B, Pat Bowlen, did not fire Mike Shanahan?
Oh, yeah. This one.
Spicy meatball.
I'll tell you what. I remember I was in Carolina at the time that the news went down. It was 2 days after the end of the 08 regular season. And honestly, I thought it was the most shocking coach firing since Tom Landry. Of course, Jerry Jones buys the Cowboys in 1989, famously brings the clean sweep, fires Tom Landry literally as he's finishing a round of golf. That's it, because I had to tell him in person. And that was a little over 19 years earlier. But this one, I mean, Pat Bowlen called Mike Shanahan the coach for life.
Yes.
He's
got a lifetime contract.
Kept extending his contract. Even after 9-7, 7-9, 8-8, 06 to 08 seasons, I didn't think it was coming, did you?
No, not at all, because you were still in the playoffs or in the playoff hunt and respectability. And I've always said this, and you'll have to remind me of which game it was. But if Peyton Hillis doesn't tear his damn hamstring trying to reach up for a pass, they win that game because they needed one to get in the postseason, correct?
One of
final three.
One of those last three against Carolina, Buffalo, and San Diego.
And Peyton Hillis had finally been the answer at running back. And you know Mike Shanahan, he's going to burn through his running backs. And so it was Ryan Terrain and Selvin Young, all these guys. And it finally got to Hillis, and it was working, and they were clicking, and then Hillis got hurt.
They didn't win after that.
And they did not win after that. They did not make the postseason.
His last game was a 24-17 win over the Chiefs in Week 14. They lost the next 3 games without Peyton Hillis. The rest of that season, it was like Tatum Bell, PJ Pope. I mean, Tatum Bell was selling cell phones famously.
Yeah, he'd come back.
Yeah, he came, but they came back because he knew the scheme. But they lost those games. They lost to Carolina 30-10. The one that I think did it was Buffalo. They lose 30-23 at home on a cold night. It's I think it was basically Jay Cutler just throwing 4 times into the end zone there, thrown into coverage. You know, bad decisions, but there were mistakes before then leading up to it. And then you give up a 50 burger to San Diego on Sunday Night Football to close out the year, and then 2 days later, it wasn't Black Monday. It was, for Mike Shanahan, Black Tuesday.
Yes, and it's just they're like best friends, and you're closer to that relationship than I was. But like having covered that team at that time, they were so close, and it was so tight, and it was a lifetime contract, and it's the Shanahan system, it's the Shanahan way, and then it wasn't. It threw me for a loop, Mace.
Yeah, and it was weird to think about the Broncos with anybody else. And of course, then it became Josh McDaniels, and then Hurricane Josh and the fallout from that is what we're really talking about here. Because first things first, if Mike Shanahan keeps the job, Jay Cutler, coming off of his Pro Bowl season, is back at quarterback for the Broncos in 2009.
1,000%. Yeah. That Jay Cutler saga continues with the Denver Broncos. We've touched on it, in talking about Cutler, just you and I, talking about the Broncos over the years. Like, what would Cutler have been if he had stayed with Mike Shanahan, who would have gotten the best out of him? And, he would have ran that system the way he was running it. So you just have to think, what if Mike Shanahan was not fired? You'd have to think they'd at least be in the playoff conversation the year after, because they already were those final 3 years.
Yeah. Now the Chargers went 13-3 in the 09 season. So I think we're not talking about a division title for the Broncos, because that was the best year for the Chargers with Norv Turner and Phillip Rivers working together. But wild card, certainly not out of the mix. Now, the interesting thing that did happen in the 09 season was, for all the dysfunction, the defense improved drastically. It was the worst D in football in the 08 season. And the Broncos at that moment were on their 3rd coordinator in 3 years. Larry Coyer fired after the 06 season. Jim Bates last 1 year in 07. Bob Slowick guides the defense in 08. With all respect to Bob Slowick, doesn't guide it all that well.
Right.
So Bob Slowick is probably back in 09. Mike was pushing for that didn't want to totally change things up. And in 08, they played without Champ Bailey for much of the year. So you had a big personnel issue there. But the equation for success in 09 probably changes a bit, because I don't know that you're talking about a defense that comes in, especially at the start of the year, shuts down everybody that Mike Nolan had, because Mike Nolan's not your defensive coordinator. Bob Slowick is.
Right.
So I think, so the question is, are they a little bit better? I think they end up a little bit better, because I also don't think that you have a 2-8 run during the season after a 6-0 start. I think they take a little bit more of a meandering path to about a 10-6 type of season.
Yeah. So we're talking about around a wild card, and I've said it before, and you've heard it, Mace, so it's nothing new or breaking. Mike Shanahan, the GM, got Mike Shanahan, the coach, fired. So I'm going to ask you, in staying, let's say Mr. Bowlen had not fired Mike Shanahan, would he have insisted that Mike get some help in constructing the roster, an assistant GM or whatever? We talk about the Fergusons, who had helped along the way in building up that Broncos roster to get the Super Bowls in 31-32. Everyone thinks it was all Mike Shanahan. No, it wasn't. There were others in the building helping to build this team. So would Mr. B have insisted, like, hey, love you, Mike, we got to make the playoffs, get some help?
It's possible. And the interesting thing there is Mike came in 95, and certainly there were moves made, free agency and draft, that bolstered the roster, but he didn't exactly inherit a bare cupboard. Right. He inherited John Elway, inherited Gary Zimmerman. They'd already drafted Tom Nalen. They already had Rod Smith in the building. So you look and see that they had Shannon Sharp, Hall of Famer. You had key pieces already there. You weren't starting from scratch. But I think that's a fair question. The question is, when would it have happened? Would it have happened after that 08 season, or do you think it might have been one more year in coming before we were talking about that?
Well, if they were considering firing him, maybe it should have been after 08. Yeah. And it was Bob Ferguson, right? Because I confused the Ferguson with the Goodman.
Bob Ferguson was there in the 90s.
Build that
in the 90s. Yeah, and then he was cast aside after Mike came in. And Mike oversaw everything. And of course, John Beek was the GM, but Mike had the final say. And then Ted Sundquist became the GM. Mike had final say. And then famously in early March of 08, fired Ted Sundquist.
When was Michael Lombardi running around? Because Lombardi and Ted never spoke. Lombardi was in the building and they never spoke.
That whole thing.
And I like both of those gentlemen.
I would argue that 2007 is in the mix with 2022 as far as most dysfunctional Broncos seasons.
That says a lot.
That you basically had this unpaid shadow GM in Mike Lombardi in the building, and Mike Lombardi brought in by Mike Shanahan. I mean, if you're in the personnel department, what a shot across the bow.
Right.
And it's like, what's going on? What's going on here? I mean, it's like another spy in the building. I mean, yeah, that dynamic, it was just incredibly frosty. And like you said, not a word was exchanged. Why would it? I mean, it made no sense on any level whatsoever to have that. I put it this way, I don't think you'd see that from Sean Payton coming in here. It just incredible dysfunction. So, but that's a good point, because clearly the bug of like personnel, let's have someone else for personnel is in the ears there. Would it have been Mike Lombardi, or would it have been somebody else? I think that's the question that's worth asking. Someone
Mike Shanahan friendly, but people always make the assumption like Mike wouldn't have done that. I'm not going to make that assumption. I think if, Mr. Bowlen and Mike, they're so close. If Mr. B says to Mike, like, hey, get somebody, get somebody that can help you make these decisions. Like the roster construction hadn't worked, getting all the Browns defensive linemen and Coach Patterson along with them. Like that stuff didn't work for Mike. We all love Mike Shanahan, but the personnel decisions were not where they needed to be. And it put the Broncos in this position.
All right. So let's go down this path here. Mike goes to Washington, and hired in Washington just before Mike Shanahan was Bruce Allen. Bruce Allen worked with John Gruden in Tampa Bay, and that we know that Mike Shanahan and John Gruden, they're close. I mean, Kyle Shanahan's first coaching job in the NFL was on John Gruden's staff in Tampa Bay.
Right.
So the alternate universe here, let's go down the path that it's Bruce Allen that Mike Shanahan brings in.
Dude, yeah, it would work. It would work. You're giving me chills just talking about it. Look at that. Wow. Bruce Allen in to help Mike Shanahan construct the roster.
Well, I'll tell you this, a couple of things on Bruce Allen. Number one, he is one of the best salary cap fixers there's ever been. In Tampa Bay, he got fired, and I still believe wrongly got fired, because he inherited a salary cap mess when he got in there, spent 4 years basically cleaning that up. And then after a 9-7 season, they fired him and John Gruden on the same day. I think he got kind of caught up in that. Drafting, it's kind of certainly a mixed bag. Now, the thing is, we don't really know what the Bruce Allen, Mike Shanahan vision would have been in Washington, because you had Daniel Snyder looming over.
Right.
Like the 2012 draft RG3
Yes.
in 2012.
No matter what.
The bone thrown to Mike and Bruce was, you can get your quarterback later. They picked Kirk Cousins. RG3's in broadcasting. Kirk Cousins is still a starting quarterback in the NFL.
Making mega bucks.
Yes. So, first of all, how do we think Jay Cutler evolves under Mike Shanahan? Do you think that his talent overcomes the leadership deficiencies?
No, I think Jay Cutler kind of hits a peak. I don't think we saw it with Mike Shanahan yet, but he hits a peak and then he just kind of stays there. That's kind of the way Jay Cutler was.
At what point then is Mike casting an eye toward the draft? Is he doing it by 2012? Is he doing it by 2012, which would have been Jay Cutler's 7th season?
Yes.
And the Broncos are using a 4th round pick or a late 3rd round pick on Kirk Cousins.
We know Mike has got those wandering eyes, Mike. And I let's just say 2012. I like it in this alternate universe. If you give Cutler that much time, and then you say, okay, it's time to look elsewhere.
Because I think let's kind of get a read on the evolution of the Broncos form. I think we agree wild card type of season in 2009, second place. 2010, KC wins the division, I believe, at 10-6. That's one of those that could have gone either way. And we saw in Chicago with Jay Cutler, there was a year-to-year variance. It kind of went back and forth. So it's fair to say you could look at 2010 being an 8-8 type of season. 2011, I think in a bad AFC West, you win it at 9-7 or 10-6.
Okay.
But at this point, though, you could be sitting here with Jay Cutler, year 6, and the best season you've had is 10-6. Unless there's been a miracle playoff run, you've been like a wild card you've been in the wild card round a couple of times.
Well, and I would
a division title in a bad year for the AFC West. And look, I mean, Mike got the bug to pick Cutler coming off of a 13-3 season.
Right.
He's always looking at quarterbacks. So the returns are good, but not great. And in 2012, a mid-round pick is used on Kirk Cousins. And by 2013, things start to get interesting.
Yes, by 2013, things are interesting.
Peyton Manning's not a Bronco, by the way, in this
alternate universe. Yeah. And I would say this, like, regular season notwithstanding, what are they doing in the postseason? Like, they could be a wild card. I would envision them with Jay Cutler as being more one and done, honestly. So now you've had multiple playoff appearances.
Do they beat Pittsburgh in the wild card round in 2011 with Jay Cutler rather than Tim Tebow?
No.
Isn't that bonkers
because
to think?
Dick LeBeau is going to create a real game plan.
That's true.
Dick LeBeau, who we all love, one of the greatest to ever do it as a player and as a coach.
That was his worst day as a coach.
He was so disrespectful to Tim Tebow, and Tebow and DT got him.
Yeah. He would have had a normal game plan.
Yeah. So you don't have that miracle overtime. So
it's 2 one-and-done playoff appearances in the Cutler era, 6 years in.
Mike's looking elsewhere then. He's looking at Kirk Cousins. You mentioned Kyle being on John Gruden's staff.
Kyle Shanahan.
I want the succession
Kyle
plan in
Shanahan
place.
is coming in. Kyle Shanahan.
I want Kyle here.
Kyle's
in
on
this
the
alternate
Kyle
universe.
comes on. Kyle is on the staff. Let's say it happens in 2010, the same time that it happened in Washington. The other thing that also would have been starting to happen tragically is that Mike Heimerdinger, the late Mike Heimerdinger, was becoming ill with cancer.
Right.
So there would have been a need to have somebody else in there as Dinger was receiving treatment. So yeah, Kyle Shanahan comes aboard in 2010. But the thing is, to have that transition, at some point, it's got to come together, and there's got to be a big season. We know what Kirk Cousins does in this offense. I think Kirk Cousins' arc ends up being completely different with Mike and Kyle for his career.
Starting essentially from year 2.
And yes, he comes in year 2. By year 3, and if I'm not mistaken, that year 3 is 2014. Chiefs, I believe, went 9-7 that year. I think the Chargers, they missed the playoffs. The Raiders were terrible. So it's year 3 for Kirk Cousins. At this point, Jay Cutler has either been traded or released. Probably traded.
Yes.
Kirk Cousins becomes the Broncos quarterback. He fits what Mike and Kyle want. Kyle doesn't leave for Cleveland and then Atlanta because he's not getting fired, and Mike is doing enough to keep his job. And now, as Pat Bowlen is starting to, step away because of Alzheimer's, it's even more. What was Pat Bowlen's intent? Well, Pat Bowlen's intent was to have Mike Shanahan around. So basically, you're locked in with Mike Shanahan as long as he wants the job. But when does he step away and hand off the reins? The timing's got to be right. I think the timing ends up being right somewhere between 2015 and 2017. 2014 is the year that Kirk Cousins has his breakthrough. The Broncos win the division, and I'll say they win a playoff game with Kirk Cousins.
Okay.
So we don't have the same conversations about Cousins, falling short in the playoffs. Right. And we have changed the trajectory permanently in this butterfly effect multiverse thing of Kirk Cousins, because he's not a guy who you say can't win
the big one.
He's winning. He wins in the playoffs. Do you think they get back to the Super Bowl while Mike Shanahan is there, or does it happen with Kyle?
You mentioned Atlanta and how they got to the Super Bowl. Now, obviously, they faced New England. Think of how this changes the Patriots. Mike Shanahan had the Patriots number.
Yes. And also,
think about Tom Brady in this dynasty. Like, is it? If Mike Shanahan's here, is it?
And what's happened on the defensive side? If the defense has continued to hold it back, at some point, does Mike swallow his pride a little bit and bring in Wade Phillips?
So Wade's
here. Worked with Cougs in Houston. Of course, Wade gets blown out after the 2013 season, because they struggle and all that. And maybe this is part of what brings it together in 2014 is Wade Phillips coming back to Denver as Mike Shanahan's defensive coordinator.
I like it.
Which means you don't have Von Miller. You've had to find pass rushing somewhere else. Well, hey, let's say that a first-round pick in 2011 is used. The Broncos make a little bit of a trade up, and they use that first-round pick on a bright, young prospect named J.J. Watt.
I like that. Okay. I was going to go Patrick Peterson there to continue the Champ Bailey succession of having a shutdown corner, but I'd take J.J. Watt there.
Well, Champ's still there at that time. Champ is still playing at a high level.
Yeah.
But you're thinking, we need a pass rusher here.
That's J.J. Watt.
That's J.J. Watt.
Yeah.
And J.J. Watt, I believe, went 11th, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. I think the Broncos move up. They need a pass rusher. They move up, and they get J.J. Watt. So with Watt as your interior pass rusher, as your linchpin, and also don't forget, a lot of the scouts are still the same. And so I think a guy like Chris Harris Jr. is still here.
Yeah.
Coming in. That's, with all respect to John Elway, that's a scout move. Okay. In 2015, the Broncos are riding Kirk Cousins, J.J. Watt, The Wade Phillips defense. J.J. Watt, by the way, with all respect to Von Miller, J.J. Watt in that era is better. Okay. J.J. Watt's winning Defensive Player of the Year awards at that time.
Interior pressure, too.
Okay. And interior pressure, you just can't find that. With Watt and Cousins leading the way, because Cousins, he's a playoff winner now. He's not a guy who melts down. He's got some confidence. He's got the coaches who get him. Denver Broncos go out to Santa Clara, and they win Super Bowl 50 with Kirk Cousins in the final year of his rookie contract and J.J. Watt winning Super Bowl MVP. How do you like them apples?
Oh, boy. Matt Damon, and then...
Mike has his third Super Bowl win, and I think that's when he walks away.
And that's
when he does the John Elway thing, says this one's for Pat, and he walks away, and Kyle Shanahan becomes the head coach of the Denver Broncos, which he is to this day. Now, the question is, would Kirk Cousins still be Kyle Shanahan's quarterback?
I'd imagine so, yes.
He's on a different path now.
Right.
Kirk Cousins might be head of the Hall of Fame.
He's a Super Bowl champion.
In this multiverse, Kirk Cousins is headed for a gold jacket, I think.
Well, then I will throw it out there because these multiverses are fun. Are we talking about a Broncos dynasty with Kirk Cousins? Again, I bring up the New England thing. Remember, Mike Shanahan had Belichick's number. Are we talking about the Broncos being the dynasty with Kirk Cousins and not New England? I'm not saying 7.
The window, the window is 16 through 18.
Okay.
That's when New England goes to the Super Bowl 3 times and wins it twice. Do the Broncos take away one of those Super Bowl wins from the Patriots?
I would say 2 of those.
So the Patriots don't go back. So the Patriots, they don't go to any of those Super Bowls. The Broncos go the next 3.
Yeah.
The Broncos go to 4 Super Bowls in a row.
Yeah.
Now you're dreaming.
With Kirk Cousins.
Okay.
Did you say dreaming or drinking?
Maybe both. I don't know, but you don't drink, do you?
No.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to be more realistic. The Broncos win it all in 15. From 16 to 18, the Broncos go to the Super Bowl once. The Patriots go twice. So basically, they're from Kirk Cousins really taking over. They're pretty much on even footing, I think. And it's important for the Broncos to win it then. And I think I will say, instead of, okay, and this is where it gets fun.
Okay.
The Patriots win Super Bowl 51, but Kyle Shanahan never goes to Atlanta. So they beat Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers.
That sounds good.
Okay. 2017. This is where it gets interesting. I think this is where the Patriots lose to Philadelphia. I think the Broncos, Kyle Shanahan, Kirk Cousins get there and defeat the Eagles. So the Eagles don't have their Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the Broncos have ring number 4.
Wow.
Next year, the Patriots beat the Broncos in the playoffs, but staring them in the face is, of course, a former Denver Broncos assistant in this universe named Sean McVay. Because the Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay staff, that happens in Denver.
Yes.
It doesn't happen in Washington.
Right.
It happens with the Broncos right here in Colorado. Ooh, man. But then you get Patrick Mahomes coming in, and now it really becomes challenging.
Well, and I think as we sit here in 2023, if Kirk Cousins was the Broncos quarterback, you'd be in the same boat as the Vikings are. The Vikings right now are going to let Kirk play out his final year of his deal.
Because you're saying he's still really good.
He's really good.
But we are a step behind the Chiefs.
And now we got to deal with that Mahomes guy.
Yes. And, okay. So who's the young quarterback who's being brought in? Who are they looking toward?
Well, I hate to bring this up, but Kyle loved Mac Jones. He did. He got Trey Lance instead.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mac Jones is sitting there waiting in the wings right now?
Maybe. Would you take that? Would you like that? You like that?
I don't really like Mac Jones, but I like him with Kyle Shanahan.
I don't like Mac Jones either, but he was system specific for 2 places. Get him a Shanahan or get him
The
Belichick.
one concern I have is that basically you have a mediocre quarterback who can execute the scheme, but then he can't leap beyond the scheme. And so I think, unfortunately, you're talking about a ceiling that has a cap on it. But as we've seen, Kyle Shanahan can go to a Super Bowl with a quarterback in a similar spot, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right.
So
would they have seen Trey Lance? And Lance, the physical skill set is off the charts with this kid.
Yeah.
Would they have seen that and felt like, hey, this is a young Elway-like, big, strapping, strong, rocket arm, athletic?
Do they have a season where they fall like the 49ers did in 2020, where they have a lot of injuries and they're in position to where they can move up? Also, another thing I'm going to throw in right now, at this point, Bruce Allen has handed the GM reins to John Lynch. So John Lynch.
I like that.
So we are now in the 2020s. John Lynch is the Broncos general manager.
Him and Kyle running the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel pretty good about that.
He got a coach bound for the Ring of Fame and a GM who's already in the Ring of Fame.
But think about, as we tie a bow on this what if episode, Mace, think about everything that we've changed for the Broncos. There wouldn't be this 7 years of agony.
No. We wouldn't have Peyton. We wouldn't have had the peak of Peyton Manning.
Right. No 2013, no Super Bowl 50 with Manning. We got Super Bowl 50 with Cousins now.
I mean, I think we're talking about some frustrating seasons in there. I think maybe you've got a year like the Niners had in 2020 where there's just a ton of injuries. But I think when we're talking about this Shanahan-Cousins path here, you're not talking about this team being incompetent. I think the worst season they have is 6-10 in this run. And in the other years, they're competitive. They're pushing for the playoffs, and in some years actually achieving some greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Just not dynastic greatness. And right now you are sitting there. You're in a frustrating spot, but you're in a frustrating spot maybe with another Super Bowl ring on your finger. 4 instead of 3. I'd take that universe.
And the Shanahan legacy would live on.
Oh, yeah.
Whew.
Mike Shanahan's part of the Ring of Fame committee now?
Okay.
How about that?
I like that.
How about that?
All right. More Mike is always better. It's Orange and Blue today. We're presented by Champ Honda. It's our What If series. He's Andrew Mason. I'm Cecil Lammey, everybody. Stay frosty.